Okay, thank you for joining us for today's Community Legal Centres Queensland webinar on engaging effectively with clients experiencing or at risk of homelessness. My name is Carly Hanson and I'm one of the Sector Sustainability Coordinators here at Community Legal Centres Queensland. Before we do get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're holding today's webinar. In Brisbane, they are the Turrbal and the Yagara people. I wish to pay my respect to their elders, past, present and future, and acknowledge the very important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play in our society. As today's webinar is being viewed by people throughout Queensland and interstate, I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land throughout the country and extend a really warm welcome to any First Nations people listening today. So we're joined by Fleur Hopkins, Natasha Ramsey and Kurt Moroski from the Community and Health Justice Partnerships team at Law Right, who will be sharing with us some practical strategies to engage with people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. They'll also provide some evidence-based best practices that community legal centres can implement to assist their clients in resolving their legal issues, which may include a range of civil and criminal law matters, including consumer, debt, fines, victim of crime and tenancy disputes. I'll let our presenters tell you a bit more about themselves when I hand over in just a moment, but before I do that, just a bit of housekeeping for you. So today's webinar is being recorded and we'll have the recording available to download later today or tomorrow. The PowerPoints and other materials have been emailed out to everyone registered about an hour ago and are also available to download from our website and the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. So you can ask questions in two ways. The easiest way is to type your question into the chat box and we can ask those of our presenters at the end. Alternatively, you can put your hand up and if you've got access to a microphone, we can unmute you and you can ask your question verbally. So do feel free to type your questions in as you think of them though. We'll try and leave about 5 or 10 minutes at the end to get to those. So I'll now hand over to Kurt to get us started today and I'll come back to you at the end of the session. Thanks, Kurt.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope that the lockdown hasn't impacted you too much and that you don't mind that the technology may or may not cooperate with us today, but fingers crossed that it'll all go smoothly. My name is Kurt Moroski. I'm a project officer with Law Right's Community and Health Justice Partnerships. I'm joined here today by two of my colleagues, Fleur Hopkins. Fleur's there, she may be muted. We've got Fleur and we've also got Natasha Ramsey who will be piping in throughout the session.
Hi,
so
everyone.
We're here today. Sorry there. So we're here today to talk to you about engaging with clients who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness, and also some strategies when you're presented with clients who sort of might fall into that category, as well as just some practical tips for managing client files, as well as engaging with clients, whether that's in person, over the phone, or by correspondence. So this will be the first of a series of webinars Law Right are presenting over the next few months. And really today we're just giving you a bit of an overview of homelessness and the legal issues associated with it. In some of the future series, we're going to do a bit more of a deep dive into some of those particular legal issues and how to support people facing them. But for this session, it's really a bit of an overview. Before we get into things, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, wherever you may be watching. In particular, I'd like to pay respects to the Yagara and Turrbal people, whose country I'm presenting from this morning. And we'd also like to acknowledge the overrepresentation of First Nations people who are impacted by homelessness. So for a bit of a roadmap of what the session is going to look like today, I'm going to start off by giving a bit of an overview of what we mean by homelessness, some of the factors associated with homelessness, and some of the reasons that it's difficult to engage with the homelessness cohort as a legal service. Then I'm going to be passing over to Fleur, who's going to be speaking from a lawyer's perspective, reflecting on some of her involvement with our clients through our casework, Then I'm passing over to Tash, who is a financial counsellor and who has recently joined our team as part of what we've come to realise is a crucial part of the response to homelessness, which is addressing things from a multidisciplinary approach and addressing a lot of multiple intersecting factors. So Tash is going to give you her perspective as well. Before we get into that though, I'll let you know a little bit about Lawright. So we're a not-for-profit community legal centre which operates throughout Queensland. We have offices in Brisbane and Cairns, and we coordinate a variety of pro bono activities, including our courts and tribunals service, pro bono connect service, and our community and health justice partnerships, which is where Fleur, Tash and I are from, and that incorporates what used to be known as the Homeless Persons Legal Clinic, the Refugee Civil Law Clinic, and the Health Advocacy Legal Clinic. So we coordinate legal outreach to a variety of health and community organisations throughout Queensland. And you can see on your screen some of the organisations that we collaborate with. So on the face of it, some of these organisations might not look like specialist homelessness services. We have some youth services and multicultural services there, for instance. But really, any client of these services would be considered to be at risk of homelessness, and we really consider our service to be a specialist in homelessness and the law. So hopefully we'll have some reflections that you can get some value from today. So we're going to start with covering some pretty fundamental territory. So sorry if you work in the sector and this isn't news to you, but I think it's really important when we're talking about homelessness to start at the beginning and just ask the question, what is homelessness? And I think a lot of people have some preconceptions around what homelessness looks like, and I think a lot of that is centered around rough sleepers who may be very visible, and you might see in streets, on park benches, etc. But at Lawright, we have a broader conception of homelessness than that. It's one that's used by the ABS. It's also used by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. In the literature, it's the Chamberlain and Mackenzie model, which considers sort of three modes of homelessness. Primary homelessness, which, as you can see on your screen, is a category that rough sleepers would fall into. So people with no conventional housing, people who might be sleeping in public, sleeping in improvised dwellings, or squatting. After that, we have secondary homelessness, which would be people who are in insecure accommodation, who might be couch surfing or living in a hostel, or a lot of the clients that we engage with who are staying in crisis accommodation. And finally, we have tertiary homelessness, which would be used to describe people who live in housing that doesn't meet the minimum community standards. So that's often boarding houses, crowded dwellings, and things of that nature. And it's really important to keep in mind that the cohort that we're working with will often move between these three modes of homelessness. It's not uncommon for a person who is sleeping rough to find crisis accommodation, who may then transition into couch surfing with a friend, and then due to some disruptions in that arrangement may find themselves rough sleeping again. So although we have this sort of tripartite model, it's really important to conceptualize it as homelessness more broadly, and also to understand that for a lot of our clients who may be in that secondary or tertiary category of homelessness, they might not conceptualize themselves as being homelessness, as experiencing homelessness. So it's important to be mindful of that when you're engaging with your client and when you're writing to them, or you're penning correspondence that relates to them, just to have some sense of their own identity. So there are a lot of factors that contribute to homelessness, and it's very rare for there to be a sole cause of any person's homelessness. It's often a consequence of multiple factors, some of which you'll see on the slide in front of you. Some leading factors are violence, which might be sexual or domestic violence, trauma, disability or mental illness, including addiction, and of course poverty, which might be due to high levels of debt, bankruptcy, etc., but it's also often generational poverty. And I'd like to draw your attention in particular to the last 2 points on this slide. The lack of affordable housing is a massive concern in all Australian jurisdictions, not just for marginalised people, but really for any renters, which I'm sure won't be a surprise to any law students or younger people in the audience. And in fact, a recent Anglicare housing affordability snapshot found that 0% of properties in Australia were considered affordable to rent for people whose sole source of income was job seeker or youth allowance. So those structural issues in the housing market are really contributing to homelessness. And I'd also really like to draw your attention to people who have been released from incarceration or other forms of institutional living, often without much support, who regularly find themselves accessing services that respond to homelessness. So homelessness can lead to a variety of issues, once again, complex intersecting issues relating to physical and mental well-being, nutrition, isolation. It's also not uncommon for a person experiencing homelessness to be a victim or a witness to assault or sexual violence. A study that we did a couple of years ago found that 100% of the rough sleepers that we spoke to had been a victim or a witness to a serious assault, a rape, or another form of violence. And I guess most importantly for our topic today, homelessness can lead to an array of civil and criminal law issues, some of which are as a direct result of homelessness, what might be called the criminalisation of homelessness or the criminalisation of poverty, but others are just tightly bound to the experience of homelessness. So we'll be discussing some of those in a bit more detail as the session continues today. So who becomes homeless? I'd like to stress, you can see in bold at the top of the slide there, that anyone from any background can have an experience of homelessness. But as anyone who works in the sector will know, certain population groups are overrepresented in the homelessness cohort, particularly, as we mentioned at the start of the presentation, First Nations people overrepresented, also people from a refugee or asylum seeker background, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and intersex people, particularly younger people. Someone's sexuality or gender is a leading cause, often due to a family's lack of acceptance or family breakdown due to sexuality or gender identity. We also see a lot of young people and also older people over 65, and we're seeing a growing cohort of older women as well. So when you're engaging with a homeless, a cohort who experiences homelessness, it's really important to have some understanding of these factors and these client groups as well. Obviously, no one in any professional discipline can be an expert in every client group, every person they might see, but it is really important to turn your mind to some of the factors associated with these groups and why that might lead to them being overrepresented, among the homelessness population, and also to consider whether there might be some areas for law reform or advocacy there. So as I mentioned when I was discussing Law Right, we take an outreach model to addressing access to justice for people experiencing homelessness. And the simple reason for that is that there are just a large number of unaddressed there's just a large amount of unaddressed legal need surrounding homelessness. So these stats are taken from the Legal Australia-wide survey, which I believe is from 2014, and it found that legal problems aren't equally distributed throughout the community. That stat there from Queensland, that 10% of the population experience 68% of legal problems, and those tend to be either extremely wealthy people or extremely marginalised people who experience those overabundance of legal problems. So the same survey found that vulnerable and disadvantaged people are more likely than the broader population to experience legal problems, and also that those legal problems tend to arise as a direct consequence of a person's marginalisation and vulnerability. The same survey found that 85% of people experiencing homelessness have at least one legal problem, and that half the population have at least 3 legal problems. I'd suggest, just anecdotally from our casework, that those stats are almost certainly low. It would be extremely unlikely for us to meet a person who we would consider to be experiencing or at risk of homelessness who would only have one legal problem. So we think there may be some underreporting there. But we note that certain types of legal problems tend to cluster together, and we'll explore that a bit later, but particularly around things like debt, consumer debt. We see a lot of sort of cyclical behaviour there. And I'd also mention that leaving those legal problems unaddressed can further disadvantage a person and create considerable barriers from them exiting homelessness. So I've got on the screen here some of the types of legal issues that tend to arise out of homelessness. You can see family law, tenancy, consumer debt, disputes with telcos and utility providers, victims of crime, issues relating to mental health system, issues arising from domestic and family violence. We're seeing a lot of debts from fines, criminal law, social security law, issues around guardianship and administration, particularly for people who are living with disabilities or mental illnesses, and also discrimination. So there's quite a large number of areas of law there, and we don't have the time to discuss them in detail today, but over the next few months we'll be running specialist sessions on telco and utility providers, also around victims of crime, particularly victims of sexual crime, and also around consumer debt. So if you are on the CLCQ mailing list, you will no doubt receive an invitation to those sessions when we run them. So despite the high level of legal need among the population who we're discussing, and I guess the critical consequences that a lot of those legal issues can have, we find that people experiencing homelessness rarely take proactive steps to resolve their legal problems and rarely seek legal assistance. And once again, that's why our model is an outreach model. And there are a number of reasons why a person in a vulnerable or marginalized position might not seek out legal assistance. There's a lot of practical barriers, such as just lack of time and money, lack of having a fixed address to receive correspondence, lack of access to mobile phones, email, and those other forms of communication that a housed person might take for granted. And sometimes there might be some capability and capacity issues, whether that's a sense of strict legal capacity, or whether that's just sort of a general lack of capability to engage with services. But there's often also personal historical reasons why a marginalized person won't engage with lawyers. Often a person may have a limited awareness of what their rights are. It's very likely that someone will have had quite negative experiences with the legal system or the police, or justice framework in general historically, and so they might be less inclined to trust lawyers or to seek out a legal remedy for their problems. There's the perception that legal assistance is expensive and difficult to access, but a lot of the time, a person who is in a vulnerable position, they won't want to seek a legal remedy for their problems, predominantly because they don't want to antagonize the other party. It's likely that the other party is their energy provider or their telco, and they don't want to be cut off, or the other party might be their landlord or their co-tenant in a unstable living situation, and they don't want to disrupt that. So often a person will just resign themselves to enduring their issue rather than taking any steps to, towards a resolution. But I think, and this is borne out in the literature, and it's also what we see at our clinics, is that often a vulnerable person won't conceptualize their problem as a legal problem. For instance, if someone's facing eviction, they're not immediately concerned about their legal rights. Instead, they just want to resolve the practical issue of where they're sleeping, getting a roof over their head, that kind of thing. And the legal protections are likely to be a distant second to just ensuring their own safety and security. And even when someone does want to take steps to resolve a problem, which we as people in the legal sector might conceptualize as a legal problem, often it won't be lawyers that the vulnerable person turns to. Research shows that 82% of the time that a vulnerable person experiences a legal problem, they don't speak to a lawyer, and that 70% of the time they instead speak to a community worker, a social worker, a counsellor, a nurse, a psychologist. And the reason for that is that those are the professionals who a vulnerable person is already connected to. They're the supports that a person is used to turning to when a problem comes up. And they're also the people that they trust and the people who already know their story and the people who they engage with on the day-to-day. So that's why we embed our service with community organisations, with crisis accommodation services, with hospitals, because we understand that a person who's experiencing or at risk of homelessness is very unlikely to take proactive steps to seek out legal services, even if they're free and even if they're well publicised. And so instead we try to connect with the professionals who are already assisting them. And one of the great upshots of that is that it lets us work collaboratively, and it lets us take a more holistic response to a person's legal but also medical and financial problems. And Fleur and Tash will be talking in a bit more detail about what that collaboration looks like. So I've already preempted this slide a little there, so sorry about that. So we might keep moving. But I will just reiterate that when you're working with this client group, that it's really important to have a relationship with their caseworkers and with other supports that are in their lives. A lot of our clients who might be characterized as homeless or as experiencing homelessness may not have traditional supports like family and such in their life, but they'll often have friends, helpers, social workers, community workers, other people who assist them in their life. And those people can just be fundamental to making sure that you can actually engage with a person and that you can deliver legal services to them, because they're a trusted person. They'll often let you get your foot in the door. They can often help with practical considerations such as transport, mailing, responding to phones and emails and things like that. So we really stress with our internal training and to all of our volunteers and to our staff, and we, by extension, stress that to anyone else who's working in this sector, to form close bonds with those caseworkers and with those other support agencies. So I might head over to Fleur now, who's going to talk to you a little from a caseworker lawyer's perspective about some of her strategies for engaging with our client base.
Hello, I'm sorry, I completely failed introducing myself before because I was on mute. But my name's Fleur Hopkins. I'm a senior lawyer with the Community and Health Justice Partnerships team. So I'm going to be, like Kurt said, I guess talking today about working effectively with people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. So I've worked in the sector for a number of years now. So this is, I guess, based on the practical experience of the Law Right team who do run these specialist homelessness services. But I'm also very aware that the attendees of this webinar may also be working quite extensively with people experiencing homelessness. So if you have anything that you'd like to add, feel free to put it into the chat and we can discuss it at the end if we have time. Because we're always open to learning from other people in the sector. So like Kurt said, a lot of our clients have experienced pretty significant trauma, either by the cause of their homelessness or also their experience of homelessness. So I think that it's important to always interact with our client base with the trauma-informed approach. I won't be talking a lot about what the trauma-informed approach looks like, but just know that that's kind of the framework that we're working through kind of thing, and every interaction that you have with the client, just always have their trauma, I guess, as a part of your interaction. So I'll be talking at it from 3 different ways today. So the first thing I'll be discussing is, I guess, understanding your client and connecting with the client base that you're working with. And then we'll be talking about communicating and engaging effectively with the clients that are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And then we'll be discussing, I guess, our role as a lawyer, because our role is quite a specific role in the client's life, and just having a chat about what that looks like with working with people experiencing homelessness. Next slide, sorry, Kurt. So I guess the first step in connecting with your client is just be a human being. Introduce yourself, have a conversation, ask them how their day is going. Be really genuine with clients, because the client will 100% be able to tell if you're not being genuine with them. They'll smell it from a mile away, and they probably won't respect you for it. So just keep that in mind when you're talking to clients, and also dress appropriately. I think this is a really big one. There's an inherent power imbalance between a lawyer working in this space and clients who are experiencing homelessness. And I think it's important that we try to do what we can to reduce that power imbalance. And I think dressing appropriately is a really important one to get respect of the clients, and also to make them feel comfortable when you're, I guess, talking with them. In terms of having a conversation and seeing how the client is, that will also change the way that you run the appointment. If a client's having a rough day or their mental health isn't too good that day, it might change the way that you run the appointment or the content of the appointment. But that's just something to keep in mind. It's important to actually have real conversations with the client base. Another one is, be where your clients are and be flexible if possible. So like Kurt said, we're lucky in the way that our model is an outreach model, so we are able to go out to where our client base is. One thing that we've learned in practice is that clients who are in crisis may not attend appointments. Their legal appointments may not be the priority in their life at that moment because they've got so many other things going on. So just be as flexible as you can. If clients don't attend an appointment and you're still able to contact them, have a conversation about why they didn't attend the appointment. Is there a reason that they didn't come along, and can you change what you did so that you can connect with them? Another way that we work in this space is work with the caseworkers to book appointments. If the caseworkers have the good relationship with the client, then use that relationship and kind of piggyback your appointment with the caseworker appointment if possible. The next point on the slides, I'm in 2 minds about, even though it's my PowerPoint slide, but I think it's important to leave time for the client to tell their story, because not everybody experiencing homelessness have the same experience. But I think it's also important to make sure that you're only getting information from the client that's relevant to what you need to address their legal problem. Some clients will want to tell you everything that's happened in the last 10 years that brought them up to this point, but that might not be the best interest of the client for them to tell you this whole story, because it could be re-traumatizing them as they're saying their story, and they may not realize that you don't need that information from them. So I think it's quite important to have a structure around the appointments that you have with clients to make sure that you're only asking questions that you need the answers to make sure that you're not re-traumatizing them throughout the appointment. And also this protects you in terms of the trauma that you're absorbing, because it makes sure and it reduces the risk of vicarious trauma through the interaction with the clients. Also just know that your client's experience doesn't define them. A lot of our services do have, I guess, eligibility criteria, and just understand that a person experiencing homelessness, that doesn't define them as a person, and just making sure that you don't label them, as Kurt spoke about earlier. And I think another important thing is reflecting the language that the client is using in relation to their experience. So that's in relation to whether they identify as experiencing homelessness at the time, but it's also about experiences such as any assault that they may have experienced, actually reflecting their experience to make it less triggering for them, and to make sure that we're being respectful in the way that we engage with the client base. Next slide, please, Kurt. I think it's just important to recognise that the clients do have like skills, capabilities and lived experiences, and just to acknowledge their amazing resilience. The most resilient people I've ever met have been the clients that I've worked with, and just acknowledging that they are the experts in their own stories and their own lives, and to really let them tell their story the way that they'd like it to be told. And also that the clients have such an incredible understanding of the way that the systems impact them. Obviously, the systems and the legal systems impact them in a very different way that they would impact me. And so it's also having an understanding of how the legal system does impact people experiencing disadvantage, and to make sure that we're not going into it with our bias into that interaction. And also just knowing that it's not our job to tell them what to do. They know what is best for them. So in terms of their strengths, they know what outcome is best for them. So just making sure that you have conversations with them, because they are, they're the best place to tell you exactly what needs to happen. In terms of engaging and communicating effectively, sorry, I know I'm talking really fast. I'm just conscious of the time. So if I'm talking too fast, please let me know. So in terms of communicating effectively, I think the most important thing is building trust with the clients. Like Kurt said, people experiencing homelessness often have really negative experiences with lawyers and the justice system. And so just making sure that they know that you're there to assist them and to help them through the justice system. Let them know that we're acting for them and will only take steps that they want us to, that they're in control of their legal problem, and that we can assist them to resolve it, but that they're in control of the situation. This is the same in terms of empowering them to know that the information that they tell us is confidential, and that we will only give that information to third parties with their consent. And that's including caseworkers. If caseworkers are involved, it's really important to have a conversation with clients about how that information will be managed, and that it's completely up to them how that information will be shared with caseworkers. And this is also the case with third parties as well. So if you have a creditor or we're requesting a waiver, it's up to the client what information gets given to the creditor in order to request that waiver. So it's just letting them know that, they're in control of their own story and information, and hopefully this will help to build rapport and trust when you're working with them. And also just letting them know that, we just act on their instructions and not anybody else's. I think it's also really important to not make assumptions about the client's level of literacy, capacity or legal sophistication, and this can go both ways. So it's really important to not write a client a 16-page letter of advice without asking them if they're able to read it or if they're comfortable receiving that letter. But the other way is also not assuming that clients don't want to receive letters of advice. And also in terms of legal sophistication, some of our clients want to be kept in the loop of everything. They want to receive all of the letters that we send to third parties, and they want to know how we're referring to their life experience. So just keep them in the loop and ask them how much they want to be involved, because that collaboration is really what empowers the client to take the steps and to resolve their legal issue in the way that they want to. Look out for legal issues with clients. Sometimes a client will come to you with a spur debt, and then by the end of the conversation, they've got other creditors' debts that we can assist with. They've got a DVO hearing that we can refer them to a specialist service for. And then but also because we've found out that they are fleeing domestic violence, we can also talk to them about making an application to Victims Assist for financial assistance. So it's really important to actually listen to what the clients are saying and make sure you're picking out all the legal issues that we might be able to assist with, because a lot of the things that happen in clients' lives, they don't identify as legal issues. So because we're the experts in the field, it's important that we're there picking up stuff that the clients may not pick up on. In terms of assisting the client to identify and prioritise issues, once again, I think it's important for the client to identify what their priority is. Our priority may not be what their priority is, and so it's important to know what's causing the biggest stress in their lives so that we can address those issues first. Obviously, we can use our expertise to tell them that perhaps the court hearing next week is more of a priority than the $200 debt to like Credit Corp or something, but within that, it's important that we can give them that recommendation, but also respect that they may have a different priority. We also have the legal health check, which is a really helpful way to diagnose legal issues with clients. You can find it on the NACLIC legal health check. If you just Google the legal health check, it will come up. And it's just a really handy diagnostic tool to identify different legal issues that the clients have. So it just goes through and asks questions of clients. So it's a really helpful way if you want to assist clients to identify legal issues. And also a lot of our casework agencies use this to identify legal problems before it's referred to us. Another handy thing is just to write things down. Clients often like to have things written down for them, but just be mindful of literacy issues so don't make those assumptions again. When you're engaging with clients, I think it's really important to, in the first time that you meet them, have a chat about how you can stay in touch with them. Their lives are often very unpredictable, so you need to be able to be quite flexible in the way that you get in touch with them. For example, some of my clients, they may be living in a car, so they don't have a fixed address for mail, they don't have access to their email account, and they often may, hock their phone so that they can pay for food until their next Centrelink payment. So you need to have a really frank conversation with the client about how you need to contact them, otherwise you're not able to get their instructions. So how can we work together to get in touch with them? And the answer generally is our connections with casework agencies. And it's through those connections that we're able to get in contact with the client. So if the caseworker runs into the client, then they're able to call me with the client there and things like that. Also, I guess the fact that we're in certain locations every week or every fortnight means that we provide a consistency for the client so they can drop back in and see us when they need to. But just be aware that, the standard methods of communication may not be applicable with this client base, and that you do have to get quite creative at times with getting in touch with them. I think that because we don't have a specific office where clients can come, it's a particular consideration for us. But in the same way, if you do have an office, just know that people experiencing homelessness may not be able to get there. If they don't have a go card with money on it, then they're risking a ticket, I suppose, a train ticket to get to you. So just be aware of what you're asking clients to do in order to, I guess, get legal assistance. So just be as flexible as you can if you can do that. And then also, is it safe? I think this is a really big thing for our client base, is actually asking them, if we send an email, is it a safe method of communication, specifically around domestic and family violence? We want to make sure that abusive partners don't have access to emails or text messages. So just having a conversation to make sure that we're not, making an unsafe situation worse for our clients. Specifically, if we're giving advice around things like victims assist or domestic violence orders, we want to make sure that that communication is safe and secure for the clients. Here are just some practical things about communicating with clients as well. If you need to get client authority signed, send them a self-addressed envelope and clear instructions for returning them, just so they don't have to go and get a stamp themselves and things like that. It just makes things a lot easier, and chances are you'll actually receive them back. Let clients know that you'll be calling on a private number and timeframes to expect your calls. I don't like answering private numbers, so it's completely fair enough that clients wouldn't want to answer them either. So it's just making sure that, there's some expectation management around how we'll be communicating with them, and the timeframes in which we'll be doing so. And also managing expectations with clients around outcomes and also timeframes. Creditors can take weeks to respond to your letters. So just letting clients know that if we don't get back to you in 3 weeks' time, we haven't forgotten about you, but that we will be waiting on third parties to get back to us. So just being really realistic around timeframes like that, and that also will help with building trust and rapport with clients. And also management of expectations around potential outcomes. Obviously, we don't have control over third parties' decision making, and so we can do what we can to advocate on their behalf, but we're not able to guarantee anything. So I think that's really important also to build the trust of clients. So remembering your role as a lawyer, obviously the client situation doesn't impact the quality of legal service provided or change your professional responsibilities and obligations. So it's still a client solicitor interaction when you're working for people experiencing homelessness, and just prepare for and manage ongoing interactions as you would with other clients. Be clear about your role and how you can help. If a person who's experiencing or at risk of homelessness has never worked with a lawyer before, they may not know what the scope of assistance you can provide is. So it's really important to have that conversation and have a clear understanding between the client and yourself about what you'll be doing and how you can help. And also don't make assumptions about the outcome that the client is seeking. I think it's easy to assume that if a client has an alleged debt with the creditor, that they would like to get a waiver of that debt. But sometimes the client's quite concerned about credit reports and their credit ratings, and so they might actually want to enter into a payment plan instead. So just having a chat with them and actually finding out what the outcome they want. I think our job is not to make decisions on behalf of the client, but to give them options and empower them to make the right decision for them. So I think just making sure that, we're not making those assumptions based on, I guess, our biases. Another thing is, I guess, managing expectations again, and also just explaining what needs to be done and who's responsible for doing them. And also explaining what happens, what will happen next and what to expect and when to receive, when to expect to receive letters from us or emails and things like that. And making appropriate referrals, both legal and non-legal, is really important. I think that if you have a drop-in service and a client comes to you for an issue that you can't assist with, it's really important to make timely legal and non-legal referrals to make sure that they're getting that assistance within the time that they need to. For non-legal referrals, if you're assisting a client with a tenancy matter through QCAT and then a warrant of possession comes into effect, it's important to get them connected with a housing support service so that they can be found housing in a timely manner, because that's outside our scope of assistance. So just always knowing that even when your job ends, it's important to consider what other things the client needs. So collaborating with caseworkers and other supports is a huge part of our job, and it's a really important part because we wouldn't be able to function as a service without our community agencies that we partner with. So this is particularly if you have community agencies that are external from your organisation. I know a lot of community legal centres now have social workers and caseworkers working within your organisation, so that would be a bit different, but this is kind of talking about external organisations. Get to know the agency and what the client base is to see whether you can provide assistance. Identify the legal need of that client base to kind of know where you might be best placed to provide that assistance. Understand how the agency works and the type of work that they do. Some agencies have such amazing things that they can assist with, like emergency relief and NILS loans. Some agencies might be spur hardship partners because they can help clients to work off their spur debts. And you won't know any of these things unless you have a conversation with them. So just knowing exactly what the scope of their assistance that they can do. And also chat to the client about the level of support that they're receiving from the casework agency, because they may not be ongoing clients, which is something to keep in mind. There are a lot of benefits of interdisciplinary collaboration. And one of them is that, contrary to popular opinion, lawyers do not have all of the answers, and we play such a small role in the clients' lives. And the work of the casework agencies and their non-legal supports are so important for the client. So just knowing that we can't provide holistic support to the client alone, and we really need non-legal support, to I guess get the good outcomes for the clients. The advocacy of the support agencies is so incredible. So just keeping that in mind when you're working with the clients. So some of the collaboration that we work with our casework agencies include drafting letters of support. So they're best placed to comment on the client's circumstances, and they draft some really amazing letters for us to provide to third parties, assisting clients to gather documents that we might need, like medical reports or income statements from Centrelink. Ensuring emotional safety for clients is a huge one. Lawyers aren't mental health professionals. We're not trained in that way. We don't know how to respond to clients appropriately if they haven't processed their trauma yet. So it's really important that clients are linked up with people to assist them to do that. And also caseworkers can take discreet steps if appropriate. They have such a good relationship with the client often that they're able to take steps that the client wouldn't trust us to do. So having them involved can be really helpful in that way too. Like I said, caseworkers are amazing advocates for clients. So they can do a lot of things that are outside our scope of assistance. Some considerations when working with caseworkers: only take instructions from the client. Sometimes caseworkers or support agencies may have a chat to the client and then pass on instructions to you, but it's really best practice to confirm those instructions with the client to make sure that they are what they want us to do, and also that they have an understanding of the options available to them. So that's just one really big thing to keep in mind. Consider legal professional privilege and what ways that you could be potentially waiving it and the consequences of that for a client. Consider the client consent when engaging with caseworkers. Like I said, the information is the client, so they need to know who we're giving it to and in what context. And be mindful of the capacity to support organisations and the specific workers that you're working with. Our community agencies have such a range of assistance. You might have like AOD workers and housing workers and mental health support workers, and they may have different priorities if they're working with the client. So just be quite aware of the work that they're doing, and don't, I guess, have too high expectations in terms of their capacity to work with you. So I think that that's my section. Sorry, I whipped through that. I've left you 10 minutes, Tash, so sorry about that.
It's fine, thank you. Hi everyone, my name's Tash. I've been a financial counsellor for approximately 16 years, and I've been lucky enough to work in several states and also working with our team at Law Rights. So what I'm going to go over a little bit today is about what the role of a financial counsellor is. And what a financial counsellor does is they provide information, options and support and advocacy for individuals, families and groups of consumers, and they can explore and develop and implement strategies for addressing credit issues. A financial counsellor also advocates and negotiates on behalf of consumers and debtors. We work with individuals, families and groups of consumers who are experiencing a disadvantage or a dispute in regards to financial situations. We do provide paralegal information and advocacy on an extensive range of issues related to an inability to pay household bills, loans, credit cards, rent, fines and tax, for instance. Financial counsellors are not solely focused on ensuring repayments of debt, but instead working in the best interests of the client. Financial counsellors also work in a social justice framework, being that we need to have an understanding of systemic issues underlying the client's situation. For example, any imbalance of power in society and the difficulties that some groups have in accessing adequate education, health care and other services. With that in mind, we do have a case study, and I'll just sort of skip through some of this to leave some question time. So can we go, yep, that's case study. So in this case study, we've got Jackie, and Jackie is almost 70 years old, as you can see. She's from a really good background in the sense of she's been employed for quite some time. She built a house, she had her partner. When she interacted with us, she had risk of homelessness in the sense of she was at the point where they were ending her tenancy. She was residing with her son, adult son that has had substance abuse for several years. And one of the things that we would discuss in Jackie's case would be, is she safe? That was pretty much the first thing. Because we're dealing with substance abuse, economic abuse, all of those sorts of things, it's actually raising that conversation with her and to see if she actually relates to that and realises that that's sort of what's going on. But yes, Jackie was safe, and what we wanted to find out as well was what was happening at the time for Jackie when the affordability of the debts changed. And a lot of times this can trigger a few other things that we might be able to assist her with. It's also working out what support networks that Jackie has. And it's important to sort of see what's going to be in place support-wise for Jackie when we step out of the picture. So it's not just sort of focusing on while we're involved and what we can do and what Jackie wants us to do, but also once we're out, is she going to be okay? Who does she have around her? And with this particular case, with a few of us involved, and with Jackie's permission, we had some spur issues. And so what I was able to do was go in and lift the suspension from her spur debt and her licence and giving a deferral for 3 months. That allowed time for our team to be able to work on other things with her. And it also freed up a bit of that time to sort of get into the nitty-gritty of the debts and what was actually going on. What actually happens also with having lawyer involvement is that frees up my time as well, so that I can basically get to discussing the housing situation with Jackie and working out a plan for each stage as to locating further housing once this tenancy is at an end, and making sure that, you know, she's in a stable situation there. And the biggest thing is that part of being a financial counsellor as well is that we're there to educate and not just advocate and negotiate. And this isn't just with our clients and creditors and community, but it's also with ourselves. I still, after all of these years, learn a lot from my clients. And what we sort of do then is, with Jackie, we just sort of want to make sure as well that she's aware of the services around her. And the biggest thing is that she's feeling confident enough to reach out and know that she doesn't have to do this alone. And that was one of the things that I found that Jackie was hugely appreciative of, was the fact that this was, and you'll see it in the quote there, is that in a lot of years, this is the first time that Jackie hasn't felt completely on her own. And because there was no judgment in the situation either. Her son, she wanted to protect him, you know, be there for him as a parent, and that's not something that we would be about. She's done a really good job and she just needs support. So that was pretty much our involvement as a team with Jackie, and as a financial counsellor. So I'll leave my part there. It was pretty quick. And we've got about 5 minutes left for questions.
Thank you. Thanks to all of our presenters. So just a reminder that you can ask your questions by typing those into the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel. I've had one question come through through our registration, so I'm not sure who this one would best be directed towards, but I'll ask it and you can work out who would like to answer. So the question from Patrick is, how can our telephone intake officers and first point of contact staff give better referrals and assistance to people experiencing or at risk of homelessness?
I can start with that on that. It's Fleur talking, sorry, and then Tash and Kurt, if you have things to jump in, feel free. I think that one of the biggest things is actually having a chat to the client about what's practically possible for them. Asking a client who's experiencing homelessness to get over to the other side of Brisbane to receive services face-to-face may not be a possibility. So there's no real point in referring them to somewhere where they wouldn't be able to actually access it. So just having a conversation about, I guess, practical steps of how to actually get there and seeing whether they do have any casework agency support in order to get them there. I think that would be the biggest thing from my perspective.
Did anyone else want to add anything? Just while we wait for some other questions to come through.
It's Tash here. I totally agree with Fleur. It's just having those conversations and working out the support services that would also enhance the strengths of that client, because they all bring strengths with them. And just by having those conversations and not labelling somebody, it's quite important to make an appropriate referral.
Excellent. All right. And as soon as I said that, 4 questions came through at once. So I'll deal with those ones now as well. Thanks. So this one is from Jody. She's asking, how can a law student interested in this field of work get involved, or what is the pathway to working in this field? I think you've got some potential volunteers there for Law Right, maybe.
Yeah, I can take over that one as well. It's Blair. Oh, you go, Kurt.
Yes. So yeah, I was just about to say that a lot of universities in Queensland have clinical placements working with community legal centres. We at Law Right, we supervise 6 UQ students each year, and I know that QUT and USQ and a few other unis have those types of programs as well. So yeah, definitely, particularly for your later years of study, keep your eyes open for those.
Great, thank you. Liz is asking what you would suggest asking someone if they're experiencing homelessness. So for example, do ask the question outright, or do ask if they have a safe and stable accommodation?
Yeah, so I might jump in. Oh, no,
sorry,
Tash.
Yeah, I was just going to say that sometimes it's just from unpacking what the client is requesting and what they're talking about. And when I mentioned before about, the difficulties of what they're experiencing, is sometimes that they will say, this is what I'm paying or this is what I'm doing. And by getting to know your client's situation, a lot of times that comes out. One of the things that I would also suggest asking is, once that there is homelessness raised there, is once again asking if they're safe. Asking, are they aware of services around them? Because they may have, and they may have already been referred, and sometimes that sort of can be a bit tiresome for some clients that have been in this position for quite some time. And the key thing for anyone to sort of try to move forward with a lot of things that are going on for them is safety. So if they're in a position where they can have just to sit back and take a breath and be at a position where they can work with somebody effectively, then that's sort of what I would suggest. But sometimes it just comes out in the unpacking of the situation.
Yeah, and I just add to that and mention that often early in your client interactions, you can really just ask some open-ended questions, just things like, so what's your situation at the moment, what's happening in your life, things like that, and kind of let the client describe things in their own terms and kind of give you their own perspective on their situation. And something else that I'd mention is that for a lot of our clients, for a lot of people, in these sort of vulnerable situations, that often they don't have people interested in hearing their stories or hearing about their lives. And so often they'll be very happy to kind of volunteer that sort of information about, their day-to-day life and where they're living and all of that kind of thing.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll take this one as the last question, again from Patrick. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit more about preventing future legal issues for these clients and identifying legal issue clusters.
I think the biggest thing for lawyers in preventing future legal issues is getting clients linked in for support to, I guess, prevent it happening again. Like, for example, having Tash on our team has been so incredible because us requesting debt waivers is not as helpful for clients if they don't have an understanding of different ways that they could, I guess, prevent themselves from going into another debt spiral or, you know, entering into another cash converters small amount credit contract and things like that. So I think that having different services available to educate the client in terms of other options available to them would be a big one for us.
Yeah, and I just
Tash, you might have more to say about that.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that could be a minor part in, you know, somebody attending an appointment, but it's always sat with me is, you know, did the person drive there unlicensed? You know, so something of, you know, just having a look around and just going, well, you know, do you have any spur debts? And, you know, is that at a point where it's suspended your license? I think the good thing with us is being able to be an advocate with spur is logging on and, you know, it only takes about 5 minutes to lift that suspension if it's done via spur. But that's something that they're trying to sort out things for their own lives, but just driving to that appointment is not only costing them money, but it also potentially could cause further legal issues.
Yeah, and sorry, I'll jump in. Sorry for speaking over you momentarily there, Tash. But something else I'd mention is really just, and Fleur kind of hinted at this, that really for a lot of our clients, their legal issues are just a direct consequence of their other sort of situation in life. You know, whether that's an illness or a disability, or their living situation, or a violent domestic situation, or whatever it might be. And so, really, the best way to kind of preempt those legal problems and to head them off the pass is to make sure that the person has other supports in some other aspects of their life.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for today's presentation, and a big round of applause for our speakers for making it through difficult internet times, working from home. So that's all the questions we've got for today, and we've had some great, lovely comments come through just thanking you for the presentation as well. So I will just let everyone know that we'll get the recording for today's webinar up on our website probably by this afternoon, and I'll send a link out to everyone who's registered to view that recording, particularly for those who weren't able to join in live today. If you do have any other questions for our presenters, please flick them through to me and I'll happily pass them on. And when we finish up today's session, you'll just get a quick post-webinar survey. So please do fill that out. It's really helpful for us and for our presenters in planning our future webinars. But once again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you to our great presenters from LawRight for a really informative session. We'll see you all next time.